We're here this morning at Shaker High School in Latham, New York, and I'm with Jake Landry. It's September 24th, 2002, and we're doing an interview as part of the Veterans History Project. So, and it's formally it's Robert Landry, not Jake Landry, right, Jake? But that's how we know each other. Jake, could you tell us what branch of service you were in, when you went into the service?
Okay, I was in the Army. That was not my first choice. My first, really what I tried to get in was the Coast Guard, but they were so backed up with applications. This is mid-60s, and the war in Vietnam is getting hotter and hotter, and I had had a deferment as a student and a deferment as a teacher, so I knew I was, even though I was relatively old, that I might get drafted. So I checked into all the services, tried to get into the reserves. That was almost impossible. And then I applied for and was accepted in Marine Corps OCS, and also what they call the college option program with the Army. And I scored okay on the Army test, and they said they would guarantee me that I would start OCS if I took this particular option. And that's how I was just before, 2 days before Christmas, 1965. I went to get the Christmas cards, and there was one envelope that stood out from the others, and that was my draft notice. So I had everything lined up. So as soon as I got that, I enlisted.
So your dates of active duty service?
10 February 66 to, I think it was December, I don't know, it was sometime in December of 69. That was active duty.
So once you went in, you went to basic training? Or?
Basic training, Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I had been selling insurance before that. And within a few days now, I'm at Fort Knox, and I can remember one of the, it was about the first week, somebody came and said, you and you are going to be firemen. And I thought, this is great. I've always wanted to ride a fire truck. And they told us we were going to have a whole day class. We had no choice, that you are going. So we hopped in a Deuce and a Half. Deuce and a Half is a 2.5 ton truck where you can put a lot of GIs. We went to this classroom, and for a whole day we learned how to shovel coal. Being a fireman at Fort Knox is shoveling coal in various buildings to keep them a little bit warmer, not much warmer. And I can remember I had to carry a shovel. I wore coveralls, and that's what I did instead of, I did some KP, but after I did my KP, I didn't have to do that anymore, but I did have to shovel coal because I was trained, I was certified. So that's how I, basically, that's one of the first things, one of the great skills that I learned in the Army in the beginning.
So you went through basic training, and I'm assuming that all went well. And then what?
Then AIT, Advanced Individual Training. They're also there at Fort Knox, because when I enlisted for Armor OCS, because the choices you had at that particular time were Armor, Infantry, or Artillery, the combat arms. I picked Armor. I thought, hey, that sounds kind of neat. And so we went, after basic training, I learned how to drive a tank, and that has certainly helped me a lot, especially in the Coast Guard Auxiliary now. So learn how to drive a tank and the weapons that a tank, fire the weapons that a tank has, M48 and M60. But then near the end of this training, they came to us and they said, we're opening a new OCS in Fort Lee, Virginia. It will be the first, you will be the first class to start and finish OCS since World War II. There was another class ahead of us, but they had started their OCS training at Fort Knox. So I think out of about 60 or so guys, only one decided he wanted to stay and go through Armor. The rest of us decided we might have a chance of surviving through this if we went to quartermaster OCS. So that's what happened with AIT. Then we started OCS, 6 months of very tough training. We ran everywhere. We ate, I don't know how, but we didn't, none of us gained any weight, but we ate like crazy. Then the food in OCS was probably the best that I ever had in the Army. And made a lot of friends there, and sleep was, getting enough sleep was always a challenge, because you had to do so many things to make sure that the barracks were in good shape. And but I was lucky. I was selected to be commander of troops for our senior review, and that's the position where you march the troops and review the troops with the commanding general of the base. And that was a kick for me, and my wife got to see that. We graduated. Oh, and I was looking forward, after going through OCS, to say, finally, I'm going to get into the real Army, and because I've been in training all this time, from February until now, it's almost a year of training, 10 months, real Army. Well, the company commander came to me, the company that I was in OCS, and he says, Landry, candidate Landry, senior candidate Landry, you've done a good job. We want you to stay on as a TAC officer, meaning TAC officer is the equivalent of a drill sergeant, but it's OCS. So I wound up in I was in the same unit. I worked with guys that had, tried to get, that's part of the job of TAC officers, to eliminate the weaker people. And so these are guys that had tried to get me to quit, along with everybody else to quit. Now they were my friends. It was a strange turnaround. But I spent a year in as a TAC officer. And one thing, getting back to OCS, I just remembered. We decided to get a football team together, flag football team, and make it a league because we were getting companies. As the war got hotter, we added more companies, and they needed more officers. Well, we started this flag football league, 11 people on a team, and it may as well have been tackled, because it was brutal. There was a lot of competition, and almost every game somebody broke something. And we had special services officiate. These were guys that, special services in the military, in the Army, they do things like this. These were trained officials, and they did other football games around post. And we had, most of the guys that played were college graduates and had played in college. I had not, and I was a center. And being the center, if you know football, is kind of a tough position, because for a split second you have no chance to defend yourself, and the guy across from you is coming at you. But it was interesting, because our company commander told us, if you win today, this was our first game, if you win today, I'm going to give you overnight passes. Well, we had not had overnight passes. And if you're talking about young men, early 20s to late 20s, who've been cooped up for months, their chance to get off post, away from this. Well, we were usually behind at halftime in every game, but we won every game. And I think part of the motivation was to get off post and to enjoy being away from that for a while. But it was a good experience. I remember they were really, one of the things that I remember that was kind of, I don't know if it was unusual with OCS or not. There's a military term, and it's used in a book today by Stephen Ambrose, Citizen Soldiers. He talks about chicken shit. Well, we had this one brigade commander who would go around and inspect our, we had to show him our hands, cuticles, make sure our hands were clean, and he would go around and measure how much the heels on our boots were run down. And if they were past a certain point, you got demerits or you got gigged or you can get into trouble for it. Well, the problem with it is that to maintain this heel situation, you had to get them replaced. I mean, you don't rebuild a heel, you have to replace the whole thing. And what we learned was that after, you keep replacing heels this often, it's harder for them because they're just held in by nails, they're not glued. And we ran everywhere, and every once in a while somebody would lose a heel. And if you traveled around Fort Lee today, you would probably find off the road some places heels when we were there in that particular time frame, because that was a chicken shit command emphasis. Chicken shit means picky stuff that gets in the way of the mission. That's it, basically.
Jake, I forgot to ask you, you were married when you went in?
Yes.
And how old were you?
I was, let's see, 25. Yeah, I was 25. I was an old man compared to most of the guys were early 20s, and so I was an older man, and it was tough to, all of a sudden things are going good, and we're talking about starting a family, and then I get drafted.
Okay, so from you were the TAC officer there at
in OCS, Fort Lee. And then it's interesting you asked a minute ago about being married, because after we had been there at Fort Lee and lived on post, and it was, I'd say, one of the years that we really enjoyed most as a married couple was that year in Virginia, because there's so much that you're not far from Richmond, Washington, D.C., Williamsburg, Skyline Drive, North Carolina. I mean, there's a lot to do, a lot to see. And we really enjoyed it, and we decided we were trying to start a family. We just weren't having any luck, so we started adoption proceedings. And that was going along smoothly until I got orders for Vietnam. And my wife certainly was not going to stay in Fort Lee. She wanted to go back with her parents in New Jersey. So she went back to New Jersey, and we had to stop the adoption proceedings. But we were lucky because I got orders for Vietnam, and I was able to see my wife in Hawaii for R&R, and guess what? We had a son as a result of that, and so we're very happy that we got our family started that way.
Sure. So you got the assignment to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So what unit were you with, and how did that all? How'd you get there, and what was it like when you got there?
I got orders to go over, and I don't know how often this happened. I didn't go to the unit that I was supposed to. I wound up with the 9th Infantry Division. And I was with the 9th S&T Supply and Transport, and basically we supplied the division and moved the division, units around as, part of the Division Support Command. And we also were in charge of Graves registration. That's a quartermaster function, quartermaster's supply and logistics. Flew over. This is just before I celebrated Christmas, December of '67, with my family, with my wife Ann and her family. And then I flew over. So it was kind of not the most happy moment in my life to have to leave and go over. Get to, I think we went from, flew to California, I think it was Travis Air Force Base, then Hawaii, then Guam, Philippines, and then Vietnam. And got off the plane and got to our, I think we landed at either Tan Son Nhut or Bien Hoa, I'm not sure which. But I saw all these little fires all around. What's going on? What are all these little, just plumes of dark smoke? And I found out that that was diesel fuel, but it was diesel fuel used to burn something else, and that basically latrines were 55-gallon drums that were cut in half, put under a seat, a hole, and I don't know how often they would be pulled out, some diesel and set afire, and that's what was burning. So that's how we took care, because we could, a lot of Vietnam where I was, if you went down too far to dig a latrine, you'd hit water, because we were in the Mekong River Delta. We had a boat company attached to our battalion. Was one of the few boat companies in the Army. And basically they pushed barges around the Mekong River Delta. And the barges had artillery on them because they couldn't move artillery in a lot of these places because it would just sink right into the rice paddies. So that's and we did a lot of work with the Navy. The Navy had some boats right near where our base was, and we worked pretty closely with the Navy on, because they would provide protection for these boats to push the artillery around.
What was the primary mission then, Jake, for your unit?
It was to get gasoline, supplies, food, uniforms, things like that to the soldiers that needed them. We ran supply points, everything, you know, the self-service supply center, which is basically an office supply. We ran those, and we did graves registration, and that's basically when GIs were killed. Our guys would get the bodies, bring them back, process them, and get them on to Saigon. And I remember one time at a place called Tan An, there was a unit that landed. They had an operation, and they must have landed right on top of the Viet Cong, and I happened to be there the next day, and they were bringing in the bags, body bags, and it was most of these were young kids that I'm sure a year or so before had no idea they were going to wind up this way, and that was a very sobering experience to see that. The closest I came to, I was never wounded. I never shot at anybody. Once I was taking a shower, and this was lukewarm water. We never, if you were lucky to get into Saigon in a hotel or something like that, then, or in Vung Tau. But I was taking a shower, and the siren went off, meaning red alert, which meant incoming. Incoming could be mortars or rockets at Viet Cong, and this was at Camp Bearcat. Well, I toweled off, ran into the closest bunker, and was in there for about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden we hear this shh get louder and louder, and then boom, boom, and we could feel the ground shake. And after it was all over, a Russian rocket had landed about this far outside the shower where I was. There was a hole about a foot or so deep, and I've got a picture that shows this. I took it the next day from inside the shower. There are holes in the side of it was just I don't know, I think it was plywood sided building. And that was it. There was nothing else in between. But you can see the sun coming through. And if I would have stayed in that shower and not gone in, or there hadn't been a warning, I'd probably have some shrapnel in my upper body. So that was the close. Another thing that I did in Vietnam that I'm proud of, and I got a Bronze Star for it. There were orphanages and schools all around us. And in the division bulletin, they asked anybody that's interested in teaching English to Vietnamese students, sign up. Well, out of probably, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of officers were enlisted who could have done it, myself and one other guy signed up. And I would go into this village, Long Thon, and teach once a week kids. And I worked with the Boy Scouts a little bit, not as much teaching English as I was trying to get them to laugh and smile and sing. and have some fun with them, because if you can understand these kids, and some of the kids were beautiful, and they had French fathers. Some of the girls I can remember, you could tell they were, you know, a little bit of European, and the South Vietnamese mother. But for all their lives, they have known war, whether it was the French in there or then we come in, Viet Cong. So for at least for a while, I had some fun. They had some fun, and that helped me get through that year. Also, R&R was something that everybody looked forward to, and it was great to get to Hawaii and see my wife and relax. But it was still, I couldn't get used to sleeping through the night without maybe with some, you know, something incoming or something that would. But we did have a good time, obviously.
When you were in Vietnam, were you moving around a fair amount, Jake? It sounded like you mentioned 2 or 3 different places.
When I was first there, I was at Swan Lock, and I think the first day I was there, some kid came running up to me and said, "We got sniper fire on the shower point." That's another thing we did. We operated showers in the field. And so here I am, you know, first lieutenant, first day on the job after some training, and got sniper fire. But it turned out to be, there wasn't anybody there, so yes, maybe there was, but that was an interesting way to start.
Any other particularly memorable experiences when you were over there, either good experiences or not so good?
What there was, there's an interesting experience, and that was when we went. I guess every division, when you went in to report, they put you in an area for a week when you went through some training and your paperwork was processed, and then you would go to your unit. So you were in part of the headquarters. Well, part of the training was to go on a patrol. Now, I was in quartermaster, and we weren't, you know, our training didn't emphasize, you know, we did some of that stuff, but our training was emphasizing logistics and supply. So we went on this patrol, and I can remember, you know, we had all our rations and candy and cigarettes and things, and we're marching down through this rubber plantation. All of a sudden, kids start coming out, boom, like crazy. And, hey, and they put their arms around us, and after a while they start, "Give me chop chop." Well, that meant we want some food. Okay, so I'm thinking, big brother, oh, I'm going to give him my food. And some of the older kids wanted cigarettes, some of the younger kids wanted cigarettes. So this went on, and finally we had to shoo them off because we had to set up a perimeter and do all this at night. Well, the next morning, these same kids are back. Now, all I had for this whole period, I think, was a can of peaches, because I had given all this food away, and I thought, boy, this is good. This is the way we're going to win the hearts and minds of these kids. So we're getting on the deuce and a halfs to take us back to the base, and these kids are back there. "Give me chop chop." And we're saying, "Hey, we don't have any. We gave it to you last night, yesterday. Give me chop chop." And you know what they did? They stoned us. They picked up pieces of the little porcelain bowls that they had in the rubber plantations and anything they could get. They stoned us. One kid, I don't think he got a Purple Heart for it, but one kid got a cut on his wrist that was sitting in the truck, a deuce and a half. And that was something that kind of surprised me, but you know, it reminds me too, just a couple of years before, I had written a letter to the editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer. I can still see that page, and it had a map of I think it was Southeast Asia, and our foreign policy, and foreign policy. All it was Army bases around there. It didn't say too much about foreign policy. And I wrote this. And here I am. Then I'm there a couple of years later.
Interesting. What were your accommodations? I mean, you've talked a little bit about accommodations, but what were your living arrangements like where you were? What was the food like?
We had my first tent that I slept in was probably could have slept 4, but there were just two of us, another officer and myself, and we had sandbags around the outside of it so that if a mortar round came in and hit outside, you were okay. If it came through the tent, well, that would probably be it. Then we got kind of an upgrade. Oh, and another thing that people don't realize, most of the time you had to wear mosquito netting or have mosquito netting, keep the mosquitoes out at night, and take these malaria pills. And but then we had a better hooch. We called the places where we lived hooches, and one that had a little bit more room. And then finally, when I was at Swan Lock, and then Bearcat, and then Dongtam. At Dongtam, we slept in a building, which was nice.
Jake, and I'm going to ask Gary if you hold these, if Gary can zoom in, maybe we can maybe tell us a little bit about some of those pictures. Can you get that, Gary?
Okay, this one is a picture of me in a classroom. Actually, I'm teaching these kids to sing a Beatles song, and it was. We had a lot of fun with. I had a lot of fun with them, and they could. I can remember I brought some ice cream. We also made ice cream in our unit, and brought some ice cream to them. Had a great party.
That's neat. How about that one, Jake? And I think you just mentioned.
Okay, let me see if I get this one right. This is the inside of the shower. And you see those little white spots. Those white spots are the holes that the little piece. And I tried to save some of those pieces of metal. They were just jagged pieces of steel, and they got lost somewhere. Okay, this is what was our hooch at Camp Bearcat, and I don't know if you can see the sandbags piled around the side, and also over here to the left, that's the shower, and you can see the ladder there. They would climb up to fill, put the water in there, and heat. And then there was I think they used diesel fuel to warm it up a little bit. But the shower was pretty close to us, but it was not the greatest, but it was a shower. This is Swan Lock. This is my first home in Vietnam, and spent Christmas there and New Year's. That was an interesting. There for a couple of weeks at Swan Lock. And we used to go to this place called the James Bond Restaurant in downtown Swan Lock, and we used to kid because you'd order the food, and the joke was that when they took your order, they would go plant whatever you ordered, or go out to try to catch the fish or whatever, because it took a long time. So in the meantime, we drank a lot of beer, and so that was. Oh, that reminds me of another story. When I first got there, on holidays in Vietnam, I don't know if it's like this in other wars. The only difference was that sometimes people would get hold of some flares, and they would go off, and sometimes guys would just shoot, around, put their M16 on automatic, and. But one of the things that you also do on holidays in Vietnam, you drink more because there's not much else to do. And I was there. This was Christmas Eve, and I was at Bearca in training, in this orientation. And I had met some guys that we were all in this together, and I drank, and well, I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning with a little bit of a hangover, and there's a truck, a PA system on a Jeep going around saying Bob Hope is going to be at Bearca this afternoon. I think it was that afternoon. And I just put my head back down and went back to sleep. Then somebody shook my bed. Lieutenant Landry. I look up, and here's this guy that I had gone through OCS with. He had seen my name on the roster. He was in the unit that I was going to. So he came over. We went over. I had Christmas dinner, which was really nice. The food, was great, with my new battalion commander and another guy I had known from OCS. So to go from, really pretty low and feeling terrible, had Christmas dinner, and then we went to see Bob Hope and Raquel Welch and Miss World, and it was a very special day. Very special day.
Neat. And how long were you in Vietnam, Jake?
Just a year, December 67 to December 68.
And then what?
Then I extended for a year, and you could do that as an officer. And I didn't want to, because when you're an officer, it's a refrad, release from active duty. And I would have been released from active duty and got off the plane and been unemployed. So I decided I'll extend for a year, and what they were doing is usually giving Army officers their first choice of either type of job or location. Well, I said I would like a job somewhere in 1st Army. 1st Army is basically the Northeast. And I got my orders, and it was for Mercury, Nevada.
And before, that was your shoulder patch?
Yeah, this is the 9th Infantry Division. Yeah, this is a unit that had fought in World War I and World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. And then Vietnam. It has been inactivated. This is the patch I wore on my left shoulder while I was there, and on my right shoulder you get to wear it so that was your unit that you were with. And this one. Now
that's the unit you went to.
Yeah, this is the unit that there are few people that have ever seen this patch. It's USATCA, United States Army Test Command, in Mercury, Nevada. Frenchman Flats, Yucca Flats, maybe you've heard of them. That's where they did all the above ground testing. If you've seen the pictures with the troops that are hunkered down, or the house that gets blown away, that's it, just outside of Mercury. And I was chief of supply for DoD operations. We had about 80 military and 10 to 12,000 civilians. And I was there during a couple of underground, this is 1969, everything was underground at that time, underground tests. And the other thing that's neat is that our son was born in Las Vegas, and it's always caused him problems when he has to say, "Where were you born?" Las Vegas. And then he has to explain the story. That's where we were.
So was that a good tour out there?
Yes, I enjoyed it. We got to enjoy Las Vegas and some of the surrounding areas, and got to Los Angeles. It was good to get back in a situation where you're not going to have to worry about being shot at.
After your service there, then what?
Then I was released from active duty after Nevada, and didn't want anything to do with the military. And I can remember coming back from Vietnam, sort of glad that we landed at 2 o'clock in the morning, some odd hour. The military wasn't really popular in 1969, 68. wearing the uniform, you just try to get out of the uniform as quickly as possible. That's interesting. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit, but I compare that to, I think it was 91 during Desert Storm. I was in the reserves, and I went to an air base that was bringing C-5s, the big cargo planes, back in, C-5As, Westover Air Force Base. And I had finished the drill. I was in uniform, and myself and my executive officer went up there. And I had a hell of a time coping with this because kids were running up to me to get my autograph because I was in uniform, because the war, Desert Storm, was so popular and patriotic that for kids to see people in uniform and comparing that to 1968 was quite a turnaround.
So, you got out. You were released from active duty, and then what, Jake?
Then I back in the insurance business and with a small company in Iowa, and we wound up living in Iowa for about 9 years, and we started going to this church, and I noticed that the priest was wearing khakis underneath his vestments. And so one Sunday I asked him, I said, "Are you in the Guard or Reserves or what?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, we got to talking, and I told him I was a veteran, and the next thing I knew, I was being interviewed at Camp Dodge, which is the headquarters for the Iowa National Guard, and within a week I was, they recruited me into the Guard, and I was an instructor at the Iowa Military Academy. It was a really good assignment. And wound up, I was the deputy commandant there, and then the rest of my military was at with the 76th Division in West Hartford, Connecticut, which has since been inactivated also. And there I was, I taught officer courses, I taught Command and General Staff College, and I had some great summer camps. I taught at Fort Benning. Had some really good experiences and then I retired. Now I've been collecting my retirement now for almost a year. So in that time that I spent on active duty, it has made the biggest difference in the retirement, my retirement pay also. There's one other story that might be interesting, and it's on the newspaper thing that's sitting up there, and I don't know if you can.
Jake,
yeah.
You also, what rank did you retire at?
Lieutenant Colonel.
By the way, there's one more picture.
Oh yeah, this is me with one of the more popular hats that we wore in Vietnam, and you can see, I don't know if you can see it, the mama signs. We had women that would, if you wanted to, you paid them to shine your shoes and do that sort of thing. When I was in Vietnam, I was the battalion adjutant. I was a personnel officer, S1. And I had this guy that worked for me. He was a mail clerk. He was a character, and we got along. And, you know, I got along with everybody over there. And if you want to zoom in on first this picture right here, this was taken in 1968, and he was my mail clerk. And about 14 years later, I'm at Travelers in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm teaching a school for agents, and I see this guy, and I thought, God, he looks familiar. And he kept looking at me, and I couldn't place him. And then the rest of the story is, it turns out to be this guy. And you can see, what's crazy is that the poses are so similar, and his hair's, you know, I've got glasses, but other than that, but it was interesting because I was sitting at another table. We were having a lunch in the president's lounge, like up at Travelers, and I asked another guy from the table, I said, God, Grover looks familiar. His name is Grover Lyons. I said, tell me about him. And he said, he was in the Army. I said, was he in Vietnam? And then, boom, it just got me. So then I go over to Grover, and I say, Grover, what does the name Emmett W. Bowers mean to you? And he was our battalion commander, who, by the way, wound up retiring as a 3-star general. Then he looks at me. I said, what does Emmett W. Bowers mean to you? And he screams, and this is in this very sedate, top floor presidential thing. Lieutenant Landry! And he gives his big hug. And here, we were reunited after 14 years. And I had a similar experience. I was in, I was with the same company I was in Washington, D.C. on business. And I saw this, I was having breakfast, and I saw this guy on the other side of this restaurant. All I saw was the side profile and the way he walked. The haircut I didn't recognize, because back then, for men, perms were big. This was in probably the 70s. Mid-70s. But I knew it was, and I just stood up, and I said, "Hey, Joe Miller." And he turned around and looked at me. It was just incredible. I mean, and we've kept in touch, and I've kept in touch off and on with Grover. But to see somebody that you recognize, that you serve, he had gone through basic, AIT, OCS, and we had seen each other in Vietnam. And but to connect like that, and when you're not expecting it, it's a kick. And that's one of the things that that I treasure.
So you've since retired.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, you had a good career in insurance and
Mm-hmm.
raised a family, and
Yep.
it was all good. As you reflect back, Jay, how did your time in the service impact your family life, your professional career, positively or negatively?
Well, in one way, it was very positive, because it was enriching in terms of the people that I met, the experiences that I had, the travel. And on the downside, being separated from my wife for a whole year in Vietnam, and also the time in training. I didn't see her that much when I was in training. And even when I was a TAC officer in OCS, it's a very demanding job, and we would be lucky if we got a little bit of Saturday and part of Sunday off, because we were pretty involved there. And the other thing too is that, yes, I benefited because I've got a pension, but my early career was interrupted, and some other people, either because of physical or for whatever reason, did not serve or got into the reserves. It broke up my career, but as I reflect on it, though, the experiences that I've had in the military, I think, have been most helpful in almost everything that I have done, a job, a lot of volunteer work that I do. I use some of my military experience to, and a lot of it's the training experience, because if the military doesn't get the training right, we're not going to win the wars. And yeah, Vietnam was a bad situation, and probably couldn't have been won by anybody, but for the most part, I really appreciate my experiences in the Army.
Jake, I'm just about done with questions, but I guess, and so I guess I would turn back to you and say, is there anything else you'd like to share, or any final reflections and thoughts?
I think that unfortunately, our military is necessary, and it gets criticized, but the job, unfortunately, the job of the military is to kill the other guy before he kills you. And as I reflect on it, what we did in Vietnam, I don't agree with, but I did the best that I could, and I made, and I think the stuff that I did with kids, I reflect on that. I've tried to do that the rest of my adult life, is to reach out to kids and help them in spite of what's going on. But I would encourage, and I've done this a lot since I left, encourage young people who are not sure what they want to do with their lives to consider enlisting in the military, gaining some skill, and not necessarily becoming what we referred to as lifers, but make a go at it and get learn some things, get some college credits. That's possible, and but it has the people and the experiences that I had in the military. No question, they've enriched my life tremendously.
Jake, you mentioned the people, and obviously you made some good friends through your service, and you've stayed in touch with some of them. Have you stayed in touch with many beyond the couple of guys you mentioned, or have you been involved in any veterans groups?
Well, interesting. Tomorrow, as a matter of fact, I'm going to start docent training. There's going to be a military museum in Saratoga Springs, and so I'm looking forward to doing that. I was a museum curator when I was in the reserves for a small museum that we had, and I had some interesting experiences with that. It's interesting because I did, had to be mid-80s, I did a similar interview where I interviewed a guy who was, we didn't record, no, we recorded it on audio, and they transcribed it, and they printed the whole thing in a military newspaper. But he was a World War II veteran that had fought with the 76th Division, and we were doing training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I remember it very well. So we recorded, he got a kick out of it. He got his picture in the paper, and it helped people be mindful that the military has a history, a heritage. So I've been involved with things like that. I'm looking forward to that, and I'm also looking forward to doing some interviews in this program myself.
Great. Any last thoughts?
No, I just I appreciate the time that you've taken, and the Library of Congress, obviously, that they put some effort into a program like this, so that and I'm looking forward to getting some people myself, interviewing some people myself, so that the heritage of individual stories can be seen and heard long after these people are not with us. So thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, Jake, for taking the time.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Nice job.